The courthouse doors creaked open just before 8 a.m. The lobby smelled faintly of disinfectant and worn wood polish. Fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. A bailiff yawned near the metal detector. Through those doors stepped Elijah Vance. Tall, composed, and unhurried. A black wool coat hung neatly over his arm. His shoes were polished. His frame upright despite the weight of years on his back. He moved with the discipline of someone who'd spent a lifetime walking lines others dared not cross. In his hand, a thin manila folder. Inside, copies of his grandson's court summons, school transcripts, and a photo of Marcus in his ROTC uniform, taken just months before the stop that led to this day. As Elijah approached the sign-in table, a nearby voice snorted. "Looks like someone brought backup for the big drama." The voice came from Officer Brent Mathers. Stocky, white, mid-30s, leaning back in his chair with the arrogance of someone who'd never been told no. He nudged the officer beside him, grinning. "Bet he's got a whole speech rehearsed. Reverend Mode." The other cop chuckled. Elijah didn't flinch. He turned slowly toward them, then back to the clerk. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, voice warm but firm. "Where would guests sit during the hearing?" The clerk gestured toward the benches just outside courtroom 2B. "You're early," she added kindly. "Most people rush in late." "Early's on time," Elijah replied. "And on time is late." She smiled without quite knowing why. Behind them, Brent leaned over and said under his breath, "Maybe if they put this kind of effort into parenting, we wouldn't have these hearings." Elijah paused just for a beat, his back to them. But still, no response. No reaction. Inside courtroom 2B, a dozen young men and women waited in silence, a mix of fear and frustration on their faces. At the far end of the bench sat Marcus Vance. 17, soft-spoken, his tie too tight and fingers locked together. He looked up as Elijah entered. Relief flickered across his face. "Hey, Granddad," he whispered. "You didn't have to come." "I always come," Elijah said, lowering himself beside him. "They're gonna ask you what you did. But I want them to remember how you stood." 10 minutes later, the double doors opened again. Officer Brent swaggered in with his case folder in hand, tossing it onto the prosecutor's table with a thud. He caught Elijah's eye and gave a smirk. Elijah's expression didn't change. Instead, he reached over and gently adjusted Marcus's tie, his voice low. "Let them be loud. You just be clear." Outside, the hallway murmurs continued. Another clerk walking by, another quiet nudge and whisper toward the tall black man with the stillness in his spine. No one knew yet, but they would. By the time the sun set that evening, the courtroom would never forget the man they tried to dismiss. The bailiff's voice cracked through the courtroom. "All rise." The judge, a middle-aged woman with sharp glasses and a quicker temper, entered briskly. Everyone stood. Elijah rose slowly, adjusting his coat neatly across one arm. Marcus stiffened at his side. The judge nodded to the clerk. "First case, Marcus Vance, citation number 774-21. Marcus's name echoed across the wood-paneled room like a stone dropped into still water. Elijah placed a hand lightly on Marcus's shoulder. "Breathe," he whispered. "Fear clouds judgment. Let them see your face, not your fear." Marcus nodded, a quick, tight motion. At the prosecutor's table, Officer Brent Mathers straightened with a self-satisfied smirk. He strutted up to the stand, case file tucked under his elbow like a trophy. The judge didn't waste time. "State your report, officer." Brent cleared his throat and began, loud enough for everyone in the courtroom to hear. On the evening in question, suspect Marcus Vance was pulled over for failure to signal a lane change. Upon approach, the suspect became visibly agitated and non-compliant. He exhibited behaviors consistent with resisting lawful instructions, necessitating escalation. His words oozed with authority, measured, rehearsed, practiced. Marcus bowed his head slightly. Elijah simply watched. The judge raised a brow. "And what specific behavior led you to believe escalation was necessary?" Brent chuckled, before replying. "Well, Your Honor, experience tells you. You can tell when someone's about to make trouble. The choice of words hung in the air heavy, revealing. Elijah caught it. So did the clerk typing notes nearby. Even the security guard by the door shifted awkwardly. The judge, however, seemed unmoved. Is there dashcam footage? Unfortunately not operational that evening, Brent replied smoothly. Marcus's defense attorney, a nervous young public defender, looked down at his notes, clearly outmatched. Elijah's jaw tightened subtly, but still, he said nothing. Then Elijah stood, slow, calm. The room turned to him in waves. Your Honor, Elijah said, voice steady as a mountain, may I request to speak briefly on behalf of my grandson? The judge looked surprised but not dismissive. You are Elijah Vance, legal guardian, witness to Marcus's upbringing. No legal training, but life experience enough. A small, almost condescending smile flickered across Brent's face. If it pleases the court, Brent said loudly, I'd just like to remind everyone. Traffic law isn't about speeches. He folded his arms, smug. A few soft chuckles came from the public benches. The judge waved Elijah forward anyway. Elijah walked, not rushed, not hesitant, to the small stand set aside for civilian witnesses. He rested his hand lightly on the edge, then turned to face the judge. I'm not here to argue traffic law, he said. I'm here to remind us that the presumption of threat often speaks louder than any crime alleged. The judge leaned back, steepling her fingers. Elijah continued, voice low but carrying. Marcus is respectful, quiet. A boy who holds doors open and says, yes, ma'am, without being told. If fear was felt, it did not begin with him. It began with an expectation. The room stilled. Even the court stenographer stopped typing for a moment. Fear, Elijah said, looking straight at Brent, often feels like disrespect. When it comes from someone you expect to fear you. Brent flushed, his smile faltering. The judge opened her mouth to respond. But before she could, Brent interrupted. Objection, Your Honor. We can't allow emotional testimony to override facts. The judge blinked at him, unimpressed. This is traffic court, officer. You don't get objections here. Brent closed his mouth, embarrassed. Elijah dipped his head politely toward the judge and stepped back. No further argument. No need. The seed had been planted, and it was already growing in the cracks Brent didn't even know he had made. Recess was called at 10:30 a.m. The courtroom buzzed as people spilled into the wide, echoing hallways. Defendants shuffled papers. Lawyers barked quick instructions. A vending machine clanged somewhere in the distance. Elijah helped Marcus gather his few belongings. A thin folder, a crumpled water bottle, and led him quietly to a bench along the wall. They sat in silence. Across the hallway, Officer Brent Mathers leaned against the water fountain, laughing with another officer. His voice wasn't loud, but loud enough. Man, can you believe that? Coming in here with his little freedom speech? Brent chuckled, pulling a piece of gum from his pocket. Bet he's got a collection of protest signs in his trunk. The other officer, a younger man, smiled awkwardly but said nothing. Brent didn't stop. They always think quoting Gandhi or King's gonna get their charges dropped. Good luck. Maybe next time they'll teach their kids some actual respect instead of bedtime stories. He popped the gum into his mouth and smirked. Elijah heard every word. So did Marcus. The boy's fists clenched around the edge of his folder. Granddad, he started, voice tight. Elijah shook his head gently. You don't swing at every shadow, he murmured. Some lessons get taught without lifting a hand. Marcus pressed his lips together, furious and helpless all at once. A few feet away, the court clerk from earlier, Mrs. Donnelly, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, tapped lightly on the counter at reception. When the receptionist looked up, she nodded toward Brent. You might want to tell him, she said softly, or just let him learn the hard way. The receptionist frowned, confused. Tell him what? Mrs. Donnelly smiled slightly, a glint in her eye. Who he's trying to humiliate. Back at the bench, Marcus leaned closer to his grandfather. Why don't you tell them who you are? He hissed under his breath. You could shut him up right now. Elijah smiled without humor. I'm not here to shut anyone up, son, he said. I'm here to see who listens, without needing a title to respect a man. Marcus slumped back against the bench, frustrated. Brent, still across the hall, continued to posture. Oblivious, cocky, certain of his place. Elijah just watched, quiet, measuring, because sometimes the worst thing you can do to a man who thrives on power is let him talk long enough for the world to see who he really is. The recess bell chimed sharply through the courthouse speakers. People filtered back toward the courtroom, dragging heavy steps and heavier nerves. Some clutched manila folders like life vests. Others just stared at the floor. Elijah stood slowly, straightening his coat, and motioned for Marcus to follow. Across the hallway, Officer Brent Mathers wiped his palms on his belt, checked his tie, and strolled toward the courtroom doors like a man headed to collect a trophy. He caught Elijah's eye and smirked. Hope you enjoyed your sermon, he muttered as he passed. Won't help much. Elijah simply looked at him, one long, level gaze. No anger, no defense, just patience. Brent snorted and pushed into the courtroom. Inside the judge's chambers, a different scene was unfolding. Mrs. Donnelly, the court clerk, leaned across the judge's desk, tapping a web page open on her tablet. The judge peered at it, then leaned closer, frowning. You're sure this is the same Elijah Vance? Mrs. Donnelly nodded. Same city of record, same middle name, same eyes. On the screen, a Department of Defense commendation. A photo of a much younger Elijah in full military dress, medals heavy across his chest. Beneath the photo, Colonel Elijah Vance, Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star, Bronze Star, multiple combat tours, National Instructor for De-escalation Training. The judge blew out a slow breath. My God! Mrs. Donnelly folded her arms. Meanwhile, Officer Mathers is out there treating him like a trespasser. The judge snapped her tablet closed. Bring him in, she said sharply. Back in the main courtroom, Brent was lounging against the witness rail, exchanging jokes with a young deputy when the side door swung open. The bailiff motioned sharply. Your Honor requests Mr. Vance and his party now. Brent blinked. The kid's case isn't even finished. The request was for Mr. Vance, the bailiff said pointedly. For the first time that day, Brent's swagger cracked. Elijah gathered Marcus with a nod and walked forward. Unhurried, measured. Brent watched them pass, confusion flickering behind his eyes. Inside the judge's chambers, the atmosphere was different. Cooler, sharper. The judge stood as Elijah entered, a rare courtesy. Mr. Vance, she said, voice steady but more formal now. Thank you for your patience. It has come to my attention that the court owes you a proper welcome. Elijah inclined his head politely. Brent stepped into the room behind them, brow furrowed. The judge turned to him. Officer Mathers, were you aware of the background of the man you've been addressing in open court? Brent shifted uncomfortably. No, Your Honor. Why would it matter? The judge's mouth pressed into a thin line. Because when you address Colonel Elijah Vance, you are speaking to a man who served longer, sacrificed more, and upheld more honor than most will ever know. Brent's face flushed pink, then pale. Colonel? He croaked. Elijah didn't smile, didn't smirk. He just stood there, quietly, arms relaxed at his sides, the very picture of silent power. The judge turned back to Elijah. On behalf of this court, I apologize for the disrespect you've been shown today. A long pause. Marcus stole a glance up at his grandfather, saw not anger, not smugness, just stillness. Elijah nodded once. Thank you, Your Honor, but the disrespect wasn't mine to carry. It rests where it was given. And with that, he turned back toward the courtroom doors, Marcus beside him. Leaving Brent frozen, guilt-ridden, and publicly small for the first time in his career. The real trial had already begun, and Officer Brent Mathers was the one now standing judged. The courtroom was heavy with a silence that felt almost sacred as Elijah Vance returned to the floor. The judge adjusted her robe, cleared her throat, and leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Vance, Colonel Vance, if you are willing, the court would be honored to hear any statement you wish to make." Across the room, Officer Brent Mathers sat stiffly, staring at the floor. No swagger now, no laughter, only silence. Elijah stepped up to the low podium. He didn't fumble for words. He didn't unfold any papers. He just stood there, tall, solid, immovable, like a monument carved by time. He looked at the judge, at the courtroom, and finally, deliberately, at Marcus. Then he began. "I enlisted at 18, he said simply. "When I wore the uniform for the first time, it fit me awkward, too stiff, too clean. But the weight of it, the meaning of it, that settled on me fast." The room was still. Even the clerk stopped typing, her hands hovering frozen above the keys. "I served because I believed in something bigger than myself. I served in deserts so hot they peeled the skin off your hands. I served in villages where the only law was survival. I led men who trusted me with their last breaths." His voice never rose above a conversational tone. Yet every ear in the courtroom strained to catch every syllable. "And when I came home," he continued, "I found new battles waiting, not in uniforms, not with weapons, but in glances, in lowered voices, in assumptions." He paused, letting the words settle like dust in the air. He turned toward Brent without malice, without accusation. Just a quiet, devastating clarity. "You assumed when you saw me, not because I spoke loud, not because I acted wrong, but because somewhere inside, you were taught that respect must be earned by certain faces and freely given to others." Brent's mouth opened slightly, then closed again. Nothing he could say would make a dent against the silence Elijah carried like armor. Elijah turned back to the judge. Marcus didn't resist because he was dangerous. He hesitated because he's been taught by history, by experience, that sometimes even your best behavior isn't enough to keep you safe. The judge blinked, steadying herself against the emotion pressing against her own chest. Elijah continued, softer now, almost to himself. "Respect doesn't start with a badge. It doesn't start with a bench. It starts with the choice to see someone, to really see them before you decide their worth." At the back of the room, someone sniffled quietly. The court reporter brushed at her eyes discreetly. Even Marcus sat up straighter, the shame he'd carried walking into the courthouse falling away like a broken chain. Elijah finished simply, "I didn't come here today to demand anything. I came to make sure my grandson understood one thing. Dignity isn't something anyone can take from you. It's something you carry, no matter who doubts you." He gave a small nod, turned, and walked back to his seat. No mic drop, no applause, just the soft sound of truth settling into every heart in the room. The judge cleared her throat. "This court finds no grounds to pursue charges against Marcus Vance. The citation is dismissed." She glanced once at Brent, who now looked impossibly small against the grand oak walls. "And Officer Mathers, your conduct today will be reviewed at the highest level. You are dismissed from this courtroom immediately." Brent stood mechanical, robotic, and left without a word. Nobody looked after him. Nobody needed to. The damage he had done was clear, but so was the dignity he had tried and failed to diminish. And Elijah Vance, without ever raising his voice, had reminded everyone that real authority doesn't need volume. It speaks in how you carry yourself when no one expects you to stand tall. The wooden doors swung closed behind Officer Brent Mathers with a hollow thud. For a long moment the courtroom remained still, a rare, delicate kind of stillness. The kind that only comes after a storm clears and the wreckage is plain for everyone to see. Elijah sat down again beside Marcus. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply straightened his folder and folded his hands over his lap. Across the courtroom, murmurs began to ripple among the observers. Whispers of "Did you hear?" and "That was him?" darted like quicksilver through the benches. Downstairs, Brent marched through the courthouse lobby, his face red and blotchy. Every step felt heavier than the last. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from Internal Affairs. Subject: urgent, Formal investigation into court conduct initiated. Report immediately to headquarters. Do not return to active duty. Brent stared at the screen, unblinking. His career, his pride unraveling thread by thread. Upstairs, the judge stood and addressed the courtroom. "We are adjourned," she said formally. Then, uncharacteristically, she paused. Her gaze found Elijah across the sea of faces. "Mr. Vance," she said carefully, "this courthouse owes you not just an apology, but a reminder that leadership is not granted by title, but proven by character." Elijah gave the smallest of nods, an acknowledgement, not a triumph. The judge banged her gavel once. Chairs scraped quietly back. Shoes shuffled. But something invisible had shifted in the room, a ripple that would not easily be forgotten. In the hallway, as Elijah and Marcus gathered their things, a deputy hesitated nearby. He looked young, maybe mid-20s, skin pale, hair slicked back. He approached, clearing his throat nervously. "Colonel Vance?" he said, voice low. Elijah turned, calm as ever. "Sir," the young man continued, I just wanted to say, my brother's in the service. You're a legend to him. He told me about your unit, how you never left anyone behind." Elijah smiled, small but warm. "Tell your brother he's already doing more by remembering that than most do by quoting it." The young deputy nodded, swallowing hard, and stepped back. Marcus watched it all silently, watched how the world, once so quick to dismiss, now saw his grandfather for what he always was, a giant, without needing to shout to cast a long shadow. As they exited into the chilly afternoon air, Marcus spoke for the first time since the verdict. "Granddad, does it ever get easier?" Elijah paused. "No, son," he said gently. "You just get stronger carrying it." Marcus nodded, thinking hard. The courthouse loomed behind them, big and gray and hollow. But they didn't look back. They just kept walking forward, steady, certain, into a world still trying to catch up to the dignity they carried so easily. The evening sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the worn sidewalks of downtown. Elijah and Marcus sat together on a bench near the courthouse steps, 2 brown paper cups of coffee warming their hands against the chilly air. Neither spoke for a while. Above them, the courthouse clock ticked away the minutes, indifferent to the day's quiet revolutions. Marcus finally broke the silence. "I wanted to tell them," he said quietly, "who you were, what you did. I wanted them to feel small." Elijah smiled, sipping his coffee. "That's the trap, son," he said. "They make you feel small first. Then they hope you'll spend your strength proving you're not." He turned, leveling a calm gaze at Marcus. "But real strength? It doesn't shout. It doesn't stomp. It just stands. And the world either rises to meet it or reveals itself trying." Marcus nodded slowly, feeling the weight and the freedom in those words. Across the street, an older man in a janitor's uniform swept the sidewalk. When he looked up and caught Elijah's eye, he gave a small, respectful nod. Elijah nodded back. Same respect, no difference. Because real honor wasn't tied to badges, uniforms, or court titles. It lived in the way you saw others, and in how you stood when others refused to see you. Marcus stared at the courthouse doors across the street. "You think that officer's career is really over?" he asked. Elijah shrugged lightly. "Maybe, maybe not. Doesn't matter." Marcus frowned. "How can it not matter? After everything?" Elijah set down his empty coffee cup carefully beside the bench. "Because if the only justice you trust is the kind you can see immediately, you'll never trust the seeds you plant." He rested a hand on Marcus's shoulder, firm, steady. "We plant dignity. We plant patience. We plant legacy. And when the time's right, the world catches up, or it falls behind trying." Marcus swallowed the lump rising in his throat. Today hadn't just been about winning a case. It had been about something deeper, something heavier, and somehow, something lighter too. The courthouse clock chimed 6 p.m. sharp. Elijah stood slowly, his joints creaking softly. Marcus stood too. They didn't hurry. They didn't look back. They just walked side by side, down the cracked sidewalk, Two quiet giants moving through a world that measured them wrong. And that was fine. Because they knew now, real strength doesn't rush. Real power doesn't shout. Real legacy walks. And it keeps walking long after the noise fades. If this story made you feel something, don't just watch, subscribe, share, and help us carry real strength into every room we walk into.